Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to all those who gathered at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt this year, here but also online. We know this event is live streamed, so I would like to welcome everyone who is watching us. My name is Lidia Wojtal. I am a project lead on INETTT, or the International Network of Energy Transition Think Tanks, and I work at energy transition think tank, Agora Energiewende in Germany. This network, the INETTT, brings you today a Net-0 event. This event will explore how to best prepare, develop Net-0 strategies, and it will take into account different geographies, as well as local specific circumstances which affect the shape and the assumptions underlying these scenarios. A few words about the INETTT itself. As you see, the network is very global. We are 25 organizations in 23 countries. Today, you will hear and see our members from South Africa, Turkey, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Philippines. One notable absence today is our member ERI from Thailand, who, with our colleagues from Agora Energiewende, developed and published just today a Net-0 scenario, basically for carbon neutrality. And this scenario, this analysis is now available on Agora Energiewende website. I am very often also asked what the INETTT is about. What is it? How do we work? And I would like to mention some basic common principles that we follow. First of all, as you have seen, the network is global, and we are working non-profit. We are also working on clean energy transition. This is our specialization. We develop data-driven and state-of-the-art analysis and policy recommendations in a proactive way. We don't wait for the policymakers to come and ask us what needs to be done. We foresee what is about to happen and help to solve the issues of the future. Our strength lies in deep understanding of local circumstances and ability to engage stakeholders who are relevant to the decision-making process. And with them, we stress test the ideas that we develop. We then share these experiences among each other to know how to best work in an environment that requires quite specific, quite delicate, yet very needed changes to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. What is also of utmost importance is that we are fully autonomous. We are operating independently of business interests and political affiliations. And I would like to just say that if you want to find out more about the network, this is the website to go. And this is also where you will find the presentations from today's event. So it's easy. And I wish you a very pleasant event, very informative. And I will hand over now to Denise Fontanilla from think tank in Philippines, ICSC, who will be the leader and the moderator of this event. Denise, please take over.
Thank you, Lidia. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. Again, I'm Denise Fontanilla, and my organization, the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, or ICSC, is an international climate and energy policy group based in the Philippines, advancing climate resilient and low carbon development. We are a proud member of INETTT, and I am happy that we are co-hosting a COP-side event with the network for the second consecutive time. And of course, I am honored to be moderating today's panel with my esteemed colleagues from INETTT, namely, here beside me is Nhien. Nhien is the Executive Director of Vietnam's only energy transition think tank, the Vietnam Initiative for Energy Transition Social Enterprise, or VIET, which opened in 2018 in Hanoi with a mission to accelerate the transition of the Vietnamese energy system in a sustainable and reliable manner. VIET conducts independent research on energy policy, energy economics, and climate protection. Nhien is an experienced energy specialist with a demonstrated history of working in the carbon markets, policy analysis, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. Next, we have Jack Radmore. Jack is the Energy and Climate Finance Program Manager for the Green Cape Sector Development Agency based in Cape Town, South Africa. Green Cape works with businesses, investors, academia, and government to help unlock the investment and employment potential of green technologies and services, and to support the transition to a resilient green economy. Jack has a background in business sciences, finance and sustainable development, and he specializes in innovation management, informal settlement upgrading, and innovative finance. Next, we have Deon Arinaldo, the Program Manager for Energy Transformation of the Institute for Essential Services Reform, or IESR, based in Jakarta, Indonesia. IESR combines in-depth studies of policies, regulations, and techno-economic aspects in the energy system with strong advocacy activities to influence key stakeholders in Indonesia as well as at the regional and global levels. Deon himself is responsible for managing information and data systems and has extensive experience in research on Indonesian energy, electricity, and climate change and economics. Last but not the least, we have Alkim, the Director of SHURA Energy Transition Center, a think tank based in Istanbul, Turkey. She has 2 decades of experience of working in both the public and private sector, including 13 years of experience in the renewable energy sector, in which she has coordinated the development, financing, and construction of wind and solar parks. She leads the energy transition work of SHURA, which caters to the need for a sustainable and broadly recognized platform for discussions on policy, technological, and economic aspects of Turkey's energy sector. Now we proceed to our panel's presentations. If I may ask you to please come here over to the podium one by one, starting with Nhien. You have the floor.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to having me here to contribute to this event. My talk will show the case of Vietnam, how the think tank contribute to support the country to achieve the COP26 goal of the countries. So you may know, as a COP26, the Vietnam have committed to achieve the net-0 emission targets in 2050. Besides that, the countries also signed several global concretize the countries' determination to zone the force to protecting our climate. For example, Vietnam is the signatory of the global call to clean power transmission statement, the leader declaration on the forest and land use and global methane fleet. However, Vietnam faced many challenges in achieving such ambitious goals. For example, like inefficient use of energy, high energy intensity, current share of the fossil fuel in the power sector is still high. Uncertainties in global energy supply chain dependence on the imported technologies, lack of finance, lack of skilled workforce for the energy transition, and gaps in the key stakeholder coordination. So our organization is the Vietnam Initiative for Energy Transition. As an independent think tank, are conducting our regional study and implementing activity to support the country to overcome the challenge. Taking the action after the COP26 in July 2022, Vietnamese government issued the national strategy on the climate change. As you can see from the graph, in the bold scenarios, the emission from the energy sector accounting for 73% of the total emission, in which the power sector is accounting for 49% of the total emission. This shows that the energy sector, especially the power sector, would be one of the main focus for Vietnam in the decarbonization pathway. Therefore, our organization, we have been conducting many research on the net zero scenario for Vietnam. We have committed to complete one study on CO2 abatement scenario for the power sector, implementing from June 2021 to January 2022. The result of the scenario disseminated to the key stakeholders like Ministry of Industry and Trade, the National Assembly, and development partner in Vietnam before the COP26. The revised PDPH after COP26 shows the resemblance to our recommendation scenarios. So currently we are working on two studies. The first one is a roadmap for the energy state-owned enterprise toward net zero targets, expected to be complete in January 2023. And the other study is long-term energy transition scenarios for Vietnam, expected to be complete in December 2022, which covers the power, transport, industry, urban, and land use sector. So in this slides, then you can see regarding the roadmap of the SOE from the charts and the table presented here. We can see that in Vietnam, three energies SOE is Vietnam Energy, Vietnam Electricity or EVN, Petro Vietnam and PVN, the National Coal Miner Holding or TKV is owned the majority of the coal fleet. Therefore, they play a very important role in contributing to net zero targets. One feature in Vietnam coal power sector is that the coal fleet is quite young, with the majority of the coal unit is less than 10 years old. This poses the technical, finance, and social challenge for the coal transition in Vietnam. If we look at the scenario called speed up retirement, where the coal fleet could retire early at 15 years of age instead of the 30 years of the standard technical lifetime, then we can see that up to 2050, then we can phase out all coal power plant, and regarding to that, then we can reduce 8% of the CO2 emission in 2025, 27% of the CO2 emission in 2030, and in the end 2050 it could be minus 53% of the CO2 emission. But I would like to stress that the early retirement coal power plant will associate with significant impact on the employments in this plant, as well as the finance condition of the energy in the SOEs. This might need the increase in electricity price because currently these SOE are taken by the government to ensure the electricity access and affordability for the people. Therefore, significant resources would be needed to speed up the retirement scenario to investing in the alternative power resources, investing in the grid infrastructures, storage, flexibility option to accommodate higher share of the variable renewable energy, to provide the social security compensation for the impact to the workers and compensation for the coal-fired power plant to retire early. So we also can see some result from our team saying that to replace the 202 tegawatt hour of the coal generation in renewable energy in 2050, then we also need to have build up new wind power. It's going to be about 56 gigawatt or 112 gigawatt of the solar power, and according to that, then we also need to big amount of the investment cost. We also can see that the scale of the impact, people who may have an issue when we phase out the coal power plant is about 17,000 jobs, with the average rate is about 800 to 1,200 USD per month. And we also can see the compensation for the plan to retire early. It will cost the negative profit is about 7.5 billion USD. So this is a big challenge for Vietnam. If we go for the net zero up to 2050, we have to invest quite a lot of funding, and also for the human resources, and we also need to have a long-term strategy to improve the green job for the people. So this is my last slide. So our opinion from our think tanks and our opinion, when we consider the net zero pathway, is that is comprised two key pillars: the transition away from the high carbon power source and growth from the new technology and business. The target toward 2030 is to increase the energy efficiency, renewable energy development with the speed up of the offshore wind energy, coal-fired biomass, and waste-to-energy. The development of the storage technology, coal power transition, and develop LNG at the reasonable level to support the system flexibility. The long-term goal to reach the carbon neutrality by 2050 is focusing on renewable energy-based transition, battery storage, regional interconnection with some other country around us. Hydrogen could be the big chance for us to do the energy transition of the transportation sector, the carbon capture and storage, and continue of the coal transition. This must be accompanied by the demand management. Better energy efficiency is crucial to realize net zero target. The fundamental for this pathway to happen is to build up the domestic capacity and technology. So that is the output, some output from our team. So thank you very much for the listening, and you are always welcome to visit our office in Hanoi, Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you, Nhien. Jack, please. Thank you.
we go, brilliant. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think we definitely do have the graveyard shift, but I think it is a very important topic, and I hope what you get from today's discussion from the INETTT network really does enlighten what's possible from the developing world and the leadership that is coming out of the developing world that really is driving a lot of this transition that we haven't yet seen from the developed world. So my name is Jack Radmore. I'm the Energy and Climate Finance Program Manager for Green Cape. We are a sector development agency based out of the Western Cape, working throughout South Africa. And we really do try to drive jobs and investment as the primary mechanism through which we view this climate opportunity. And I use the word opportunity very specifically. A lot of doom and gloom that we've been hearing about today. But all of these challenges present opportunities for innovation, present opportunities for jobs and investment within the green economy. So really what I want to speak about today is this idea of net carbon zero, and how do we really get it right? How do we adapt our planning? How do we adapt our modeling to really make sure that we get an impact in the end? South Africa has what is quite a mature policy and plan sector when it comes to the green economy and decarbonization. You can see from the slide, dating all the way back to 2004, we set up a national climate change response strategy. This has improved and adapted throughout the years to lead to white papers, leading to our first NDCs in 2015. That's now just been updated in 2021, and ultimately leading to our integrated resource plan updated in 2019. This resource plan really sets the approach that South Africa will take from an energy point of view to meet our demand as a country. All of these policies and plans and strategies have led us to a number of different net zero carbon targets, mainly by 2050. I've put just a couple of them up on the screen here. So these are the latest ones coming out of the National Business Initiative, some really great work. So if we look firstly on these graphs on the left-hand side here, on the far left we have an accelerated coal phase-out ending in 2040. South Africa has about 90% of our electricity coming from coal generation, with more than 600,000 people employed in the mining sector. This coal phase-out can be compared to what is in the integrated resource plan, which is the graph on the right-hand side, which sees what is an already very much an aging coal fleet transitioning out of use by about 2045. The majority of our coal fleets, unlike my previous colleague, is between 40 and 50 years of age. So there is already a natural transition that is going to be underway within the South African economy without this acceleration. Each one of these scenarios comes with very real financial requirements, speaking close to 45, 50 billion, trillion rands worth of requirements in order to make these investments realistic, in order to implement these plans. Each of these different scenarios, whichever one we pick, puts us on different trajectories in the long run, and the graph on the left-hand side shows a couple of different outcomes based on what that trajectory looks like. So will we meet our 1.5 commitments? Will we meet our NDC commitments? Will we actually be able to keep to what is ultimately promised? But all of these scenarios that we've mapped out here of coal phase-out and accelerated renewable growth have a very different picture on the ground in South Africa. So South Africa is in a massive energy shortfall, and this is most accentuated within our electricity space. So these numbers are slightly out of date now, but you'll see that in 2021, we had more than 1,200 hours of rolling blackouts in South Africa. What that means on a daily basis, between 2 to 6 hours of blackouts every single day for the majority of the year. These 2021 numbers have already been dwarfed in 2022. By August this year, we had surpassed this number. We're now more than 50% above what was done in 2021. And as you can see, our scenario is getting worse and worse and worse. So the reality on the ground is, despite all of our scenarios and all of our planning around net carbon and decommissioning the coal fleet, we sit in a massive energy shortfall in the country. And the reality on the ground is much more acute than just an energy shortfall. In South Africa, we have a triple challenge around inequality. We have more than a 30% unemployment rate in South Africa. In the youth, we have more than a 50% unemployment rate. And more than half of the South African population are currently classified as living below the poverty line. So how can we be speaking about net carbon transitions if we don't speak about this reality on the ground. If we look at basic service delivery, for example, something that many of us take for granted, 6 million households in South Africa live without adequate access to electricity on a daily basis. Many households, up to 60%, are spending up to 30% of their household income on energy needs. And to put that in even more stark reality, there's an 8-year waiting period for grid electricity in South Africa. So once the settlement receives tenure of the land, it will take up to 8 years for that settlement to be allowed to get good access to electricity. And that backlog is growing by more than 100,000 households a year. So realistically, we will never meet universal access to energy if we continue with an approach of centralized monopoly grid access. So what I'm trying to articulate here is that there are two major systems at work in South Africa's transition. On the one side, we have our Net-0 commitments and the actions that are coming on the back of that are extremely important and relevant. On the other side, we have what is socially and politically acceptable within our South African context. And there I'm speaking about that poverty levels, that unemployment, that basic service delivery. And in many cases, as we're currently seeing it, the decisions are being driven from the net carbon commitments perspective. So we are phasing out coal with the requirements of meeting the commitments we've signed to. We are driving a hydrogen market, again, with the end goal of decarbonization. And in many cases, this can work in developed nations where these two systems are much more aligned, where what is socially acceptable and politically palatable is more aligned with your net carbon emissions. And that's not true in all countries, but in the developing world, that is definitely not the case, and we cannot assume that that is the case. These two systems continue to be very much misaligned, and we really do need to try and find the opportunity of what lies in the overlay of those two systems. So what is both socially acceptable, politically palatable, but also can drive our decarbonization commitments? If we're able to understand what opportunities exist within the overlay of those two systems, to drive and grow those opportunities, and then to use those opportunities to inform our modeling around Net-0, I think we'll have a much better opportunity to make sure that what we are modeling, what we are looking to achieve, is much more realistic and can actually be driven home in a country that is developing and looking to grow. So yes, we will have a hydrogen market in South Africa, but this will likely be driven by our large petrochemical industry looking to transition. With hundreds of thousands of jobs dependent on that transition, they will look to find new opportunities to grow and drive the green hydrogen sector. Yes, we will have a coal phase out, and it will take place quite rapidly, and that'll be driven on the back of what is relatively cheap renewable energy that can be deployed on scale quite rapidly. And on the back of that, really driving the opportunities that sit to drive basic service delivery through alternatives, and to look at things like manufacturing as an opportunity to drive spaces forward. So when we talk about green hydrogen, what I want to hear us talking about is not the exports of a fuel to the developed world, but an export of a product that is produced using green hydrogen. So we should be producing and exporting green steel to the developed nations rather than looking to export green hydrogen. What this means is that we may have to give up some of the elegant models that we've been designing and really focus on pragmatic action that can actually drive climate change on the ground. And that for me is an exciting step forward. So we may not have the pretty models anymore, but if we can really drive that pragmatism, I think we'll have implementable models. I want to quickly highlight two projects that we've been working on as Green Cape that we see as sitting in the interface of socially acceptable and driving climate change. So these are pictures of 4 communities: Malawi Camp, Freedom Farm, Witstrand on the left-hand side. All of these communities are underserviced. Malawi Camp has been there for 30 years and has never had an electricity connection. Freedom Farm is the same scenario, 27 years, never had an electricity connection. Atlantis on the far left-hand side there had a rape rate that was 15% above the national average because they had no area lighting in their community. By 5 o'clock it was pitch black in that area. In these 4 communities, through co-design work directly with the communities and empowering them to make a decision on what their service delivery needs are and how they would like to implement them. 4 different models have been designed that are socially inclusive, financially sustainable, and technologically unique for these communities. Witsand selected and built Wi-Fi solar streetlights that are funded through advertising on that Wi-Fi platform. That now has 1.2 million unique users that are active on that network. For the first time in that community's history, they have area lighting that is providing safety and security throughout the night. The communities of Malawi Camp and Freedom Farm designed solar home systems on different scales depending on their affordability. In Freedom Farm, it is a smaller system, 50 watts, powering internal, external lighting, cell phone charging, and for that they pay a basic fee. In those communities, we have a 95% payment rate over 2.5 years. Not a single system has ever been removed or damaged, and that's purely based around that community ownership. In Malawi Camp, that system is slightly larger, they had more employment, and they allotted to have a television included within their system. And this really just shows the flexibility that comes from alternative energy and alternative service delivery opportunities that really can drive impact on the ground while looking at decarbonization. This is now communities of 10,000 households that have been electrified using solar PV and other alternatives that won't add to the future carbon emissions of the South African economy. The last example I wanted to highlight is the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. The master plan is based off a social compact between government, industry, and society to drive forward the industrialization of the renewable energy value chain in South Africa. Green Cape is the Secretariat for this master plan and is facilitating the engagement between these organizations to agree on objectives that can be reached from a jobs and investment point of view in creating an industrialized value chain within South Africa, and then agreeing with those parties as to what are the conditions that need to be put in place in order to drive industrialization. For us, this is a really important aspect, because when we're talking about a just transition in South Africa, we can't talk about one job being lost and the coal industry being placed with one job in the green economy. We have 30% unemployment. We have to be talking about, for every one job lost, we have to create 5 new jobs within the green economy. The only way to do that is through decentralization, localization, and the driving of impact on the ground through alternative service delivery in space. So I'm really excited to continue to hear the opportunities that my colleagues are going to present, because there's a lot of opportunity to drive real impact from the developing world. And I'm really excited that if we continue our conversations throughout the next 2 weeks, that we don't think about what is socially acceptable as an afterthought after we've set our decarbonization strategies, but we think about it as a key input into how and what we are designing when we look at decarbonization in the long run. So thank you very much, and I really do hope you enjoy the rest of your COP session.
Thanks, Jack, Deon.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Denise, for the kind introduction in the beginning of the session. And my name is Deon Arinaldo. I'm a program manager in IESR. We are a think tank based in Jakarta. What I'm about to present here today is one of our recent work. It's published in 2021 when we try to kind of like understand a pathway for Indonesia to actually reach a net zero energy system that is really compatible with the Paris Agreement. So I'll start with a brief context of what Indonesia's current pledge is on climate policy. So we recently enhanced our NDC from 29% of emission reduction by 2030 into 31.9% of emission reduction against business as usual. And in the long term, we aim to get reach net zero by 2060 or even sooner. And what I'm about to say here is on the right-hand side, you could see one of our recent long-term strategy, which kind of like foresaw how does this climate policy translate into the emission in each sector. You could see that in the black bar is actually the energy emissions. So even in the best scenario on the far right hand side, there is still a huge emission from the energy system. So that's why it's one of the background of why we want to do this study. So if we talk about energy transition, Indonesia is actually has many drivers. From the government side, the Ministry of National Development Planning has actually done homework on investigating what does achieving net zero means, or even achieving an ambitious climate policy means for the national development. So in one of their study, the low carbon development Indonesia study, they claim that there are multiple benefits that Indonesia could achieve, ranging from higher GDP, economic growth, more jobs creation, and etc. And if you look into the energy system, there is also a driver in terms of how the energy supply and demands evolve in Indonesia. We are now a net oil importer. It's a drastic change. When we are back in 2000, we are actually exporting oil. So now our transport, which rely on oil, is becoming a burden for the state budget, and our state expenditure is actually spent on energy. So that those two drivers is one of them. And recent energy crisis, you could say, is actually also taken the toll into Indonesia. But we have a subsidy policy. And in that sense, the burden is actually again on the state budget. So many drivers actually to change the current fossil-based energy system into a more clean-based energy system. So when we talk about our study, so what we want to achieve in this modeling and then analysis exercise is to compare the current climate policy with the constraint of how the evolution of the energy system could really produce a net zero system that's compatible with 1.5 degree. So on the left hand side, you can see the current NDC target, which is the dotted line, the far above the black line. And then the bright color dotted line at the bottom is actually the many scenarios that we run in our exercise. So in short, this is the milestone that we get. We kind of like, what we want to understand is that what scale of change that Indonesia has to embrace in their energy system, in power, transport, and also industry from decades until reaching to 2050. And this is actually, I forgot to mention, this is actually done using a modeling software that's developed by Lappeenranta University of Technology from Finland, and we also collaborate with Agora and Nhien to kind of like understand the whole whole analysis of this exercise. And what I'm trying to say here is that renewables, power sector is actually the low-hanging fruit. It's the first sector that needs to scale up the change, but the transport and industry is actually has also to begin their transformation. And in terms of the power sector, the scale of investment is quite enormous. It's one of the challenges that we find for Indonesia. So to give you a picture that our current renewable energy investment in Indonesia is only around 1.6, 1.8 billion for the past 5 years. While when we want to scale up this power to really become one of the core drivers of decarbonizing our energy system, then until now until 2030, we actually have to scale up the investment into 25, 30 billion per year. So it's 15, almost 20 times higher investment is required. That's for power sector alone, and we are not talking about transport and industry. But the benefit is there actually. So and it's also possible technically. So This is the slide is about. On the left-hand side, we kind of showcase how the energy system supply and demand looks like in 2050. And as you can see, there is a huge solar in here with a spike in 7 days of the year, you see. And we also have, because of the abundance of solar actually, and it's far cheaper than other renewable at the moment and projected to be far cheaper again. And for that reason, we also need to invest in the battery storage technology in general, and also evolve our grid infrastructure. So currently, it's also a unique thing in Indonesia. Our energy demand is not really evenly distributed. Our western part of Indonesia is more developed, more industrialized, so the demand is growing on the western island, while on the eastern part, we have trouble actually to provide energy. So some of our Indonesian fellow in the eastern part of the island is actually have not gained access to electricity until today. So, but the energy transition provides the opportunity actually, because solar is actually abundant in this less developed region. So it's actually could be a driver for also economic growth for this less developed eastern part of Indonesia. And together it could be, in the future, we project that the energy price itself could also become much less than today. Yeah, and again, I'll really state again the challenge here is in the investment requirement. The pathway is there, the scale of change that Indonesia has to embrace is there. And to achieve that, we in our model we find that we need 1.2 trillion of investment actually in total. And for that reason, I think this is still what we encourage in our discussion in Indonesia, is that we have to really promote multi-stakeholder participation in the energy transition. And in that reason, we have actively promoting solar rooftop as an alternative. As you can see in the figure, PV prosumers on the second row of the table, it could actually provide almost 10% of the investment required for the solar itself. So even the residential, the commercial sector could already contribute to the energy transition of Indonesia through solar rooftop. One of the ways that, and we could also, of course, we also need to promote other form of collaboration and international investment to kind of like overcome this challenge. And then what I've briefly present is kind of like the scale of change that Indonesia has to face. And it's more on the technical and economic constraint. And now we are trying to work out how to kind of like achieve the change considering the current socio-economic and regulatory challenge that Indonesia facing. For example, currently in the Java-Bali system, it's the most populated area in Indonesia. We have actually a power supply problem. So when you want to promote renewables, you actually have to promote it in the high demand region, which is Java-Bali. And how to overcome that, then we have to really work out the option here. One of them is, of course, coal retirement. The other is actually promoting solar not related to utility scale, and preparing, of course, the project pipeline and so on. And last but not least is actually our work in economy. We, as I said before, Indonesia is quite a unique country. We have multiple problems, different problems. When we go to other provinces, into the eastern part province, as I said before, they have different energy access. When we go into the province that's mainly producing coal, they have another different sets of problem, and then that's why we also try to engage the subnational government to try to kind of like come up with their own energy transition solution for their own subnational problem. Yeah. And with that, I'll end my presentation, and thank you.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for still being here at this time of the evening. My name is Alkim. I'm the director of SHURA Energy Transition Center based in Istanbul. So today I will try to give you the Turkish context, the experiences, and also SHURA's work on net zero transition. So Turkey is a actually growing country, a developing and growing country, and the energy demand is also increasing parallel to the growth rates. In the last decade, actually, Turkey has taken significant steps in terms of the decarbonization of the power sector. Today, 50% of the installed power in Turkey is coming from renewables, and in terms of electricity generation, around 40% is again coming from renewables. But on the other hand, in terms of energy mix, of course, Turkey is highly dependent on fossil fuels. Only 16% is supplied by renewables. The rest is coming from fossil fuels. And Turkey, the most important of all, is highly dependent on fossil fuel imports. So 80% of the final energy consumption is important, actually. So not only for the decarbonization of the sector, or not only for reducing the emissions, but also for supply security and for energy affordability, decarbonization is very important for Turkey. Actually, Turkey is one of the countries which is most affected by the European Green Deal, particularly from the carbon border adjustment mechanism, because roughly half of Turkish exports are going to the EU. So we can say that the private sector actually was an important driving force behind the, let's say, decarbonization efforts of the government. So some mitigation measures have actually started to be implemented before official net zero declaration. In June last year, the Ministry of Trade actually issued a Green Deal action plan, which contains a total of 32 targets and 81 action under 9 main chapters to contribute to Turkey's transition to a sustainable circular economy, along with the integration with the European Green Deal and Fit for 55. And then finally, in October last year, Turkey declared a net zero target for 2053 and ratified the Paris Treaty. So this is actually a very important decision for Turkey, because the traditional Turkish energy policy is driven by actually supply security, mostly. Decarbonization was not one of the main pillars of the energy policy. So both for energy and for climate policies of Turkey, this can be considered as a turning point. So we declared a net zero target, but we don't have a strategy or a roadmap yet, not an official one. The governmental institutions are working, actually. The Ministry of Environment organized a climate summit, which is well attended and took more than 200 decisions under different chapters for the decarbonization of Turkey. They are also working on a climate law, an emission trading system, and a revised INDC will be actually declared during this COP. On the other hand, the Ministry of Energy is working also on a long-term plan from the net zero perspective. But today we lack targets, intermediate targets, or an official road plan or strategy. So these are all expected from the administration side. I today want to present you SHURA's study. Actually, we are still working on this. It's a Net-0 study concentrating on the power sector. It's a modeling study and it's still ongoing. We started in June actually, and it will be completed by the end of this year. So the results that I will present are draft results actually, but this will give an insight on our model results. So our objective is to assess possible pathways for the Turkish electricity sector to achieve net-0 by 2053, considering developments in renewable energy, energy efficiency, electrification, pillars of energy transition. So we took also into account important parameters such as economic development, sectoral demand, and electrification in energy, industry, buildings, and transport. The study is conducted through modeling work based on five-year intermediary steps, and at the end we're going to support this modeling study with a policy roadmap, which will be very important, with a socioeconomic impact analysis and with a just transition roadmap. So just to start with some basic results. So Turkey continues to grow, so the industrial activity will increase, but we foresee a significant transformation in the industry. The engineering sector will be the primary driver of industrial growth, especially automotive, machinery, electrical appliances, renewable energy equipment, aviation industry, electronics, and advanced green materials production. Iron and steel manufacturing will shift from long products to flat products with increased electrification. Construction sector will grow in line with population growth. Production of construction materials will focus into the domestic market, and production of chemicals and petrochemicals will grow driven by import substitution and alternative green projects. So overall, actually, manufacturing will shift towards higher value added and less carbon intensive industries, along with increased levels of electrification, but which overall will result in an overall energy efficiency. In the transport activity, actually, it will also grow in line with the population growth, economic growth, and per capita income, but the carbon intensity will decrease because of some modal shift, for instance, from passenger transport, from buses to rail-based, or in heavy freight transport, from heavy-duty vehicles to water and rail transport. And of course, with the help of increased electrification, electric vehicles in the transportation sector. So when we come to the actually final energy demands, so you see here that in the left side, the energy demand is increasing until 2035 because of the increasing industrial growth. But after that, because of the shifts in the sectoral composition of the industry, the investments will be in the less energy intensive sectors, which will bring more value added to the economy. So this actually in spite of the increases in the economic activity, results in a decline in the overall energy consumption due to the electrification and energy efficiency. And when we come to 2053, actually, energy consumption is reduced back to its levels in 2020. On the other hand, in terms of electricity, it's a highly electrified system. Net-0 system is highly electrified. So the demand for electricity is increasing considerably because of the usage of electrification technologies in the end users. Total end-use electricity consumption increases by 2.5 times, led mainly by transport, industry, and residential sectors. And the share of final electricity consumption and final energy demand reaches to 55%. Today it's around 21% as a result of the electrification in end users. So how are we going to supply this increasing demand? So the net zero system will rely heavily on renewables, especially on new wind power plants, including the offshore and also solar power plants. Turkey has an advantage for this. Actually, it has a huge unutilized wind and solar potential, so it will be important to use this potential to the maximum level. What we foresee is by 2053, the solar capacity will reach to 200 gigawatts and wind energy capacity to 230 gigawatts. We foresee a coal phase out by 2035. CCGT plants remain in the system as reserve power plants, but in the long run, they are supplied by clean gas like the hydrogen or synthetic fuels. And in terms of generation, by 2053, 90% of electricity is generated by renewables. Today it's around 40%. And most of this is coming from wind and solar power. And electrification and e-fuel demand increases substantially after 2030, and of course this also increases the electricity demand. So we actually, in our early simulations, we tested that it is the system is reliable. Of course, this high levels of renewable energy will be balanced, but by other renewable power plants like hydro, biomass, and also with system flexibility options like the batteries, pump hydro, and PTOX. And in terms of emissions, so after a peak in 2025, the emissions are reduced by 65% in 2035 due to the coal phase out, and the emissions generated by the power sector reach negative levels by 2055 through the use of biomass with carbon capture and storage. So between 2050 and 55, power sector's negative emissions compensate for the residual emissions from transport and industrial sectors, reaching net zero for the energy system as a whole. So this is, of course, one scenario, SHURA scenario, to reach net zero. There might be other scenarios. We will also see soon the official scenarios to reach net zero, but whatever the scenario is, I think the need for extensive transformation will not change at the end. So it is very important to define the targets, to give the transition message powerfully. It's not an easy path. It is possible, but it's not an easy path, whatever the scenario is. So there are some challenges and there are some opportunities. Just to focus on a few of them is that, as you know, we're going through a global energy crisis. And we have some regional problems, regional crises like the Russian-Ukrainian war, which is bringing forward the issues of energy supply security and also the energy prices. This is, in many countries and also in Turkey, is actually considered as a challenge. So the debate is, should we really phase out from coal, or is net zero, is the transition is really realistic after all? But overall, it's actually, this is an opportunity at the same time, because the solution to today's crisis, to supply security or to the protection from fluctuating fossil fuel prices, rests in achieving this transition. Actually, this should be underlined. And at the same time, this crisis shows us the fragility of the current system. So a transition is definitely will be needed. Another important point is that net zero strategy needs to be consistent and mutually reinforcing with the climate, industry, transport, energy, financing policies. So coordination and collaboration is key here among governmental institutions, among actually all stakeholders, and also within the international community. Transition for sure needs huge amounts of investments, so it will be important for Turkey to create a green financing strategy to actually access to the international financial resources and divert it to the country. Just transition will be another important topics because as a result of such a transition, there will be several negative factors to certain communities. And finally, it is very important to act quickly, necessary actions to be taken immediately, otherwise reaching net zero targets will be more challenging. Thank you.
Thank you, Alkim, Deon, Jack, and Nhien for all your presentations. The science shows that for us to survive and thrive, global warming needs to be limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And to keep that, as called for in the Paris Agreement, emissions need to be reduced by 45% by 2030 and to reach net zero by 2050. We know that emissions continue to rise. We are now at 1.1 degrees Celsius, and the current national plans collectively fall short of what is required. It cannot be disputed that developing countries such as ours are not the most responsible for emissions, yet we are harder hit by the impacts of climate change, on top of the other crises of COVID-19, debt, food and energy, the last two especially being further worsened by Russia's war in Ukraine. Yet here we have 4 developing countries with net zero pledges. So Vietnam and South Africa with a 2050 target, Turkey, as Alkim said, with 2053, and Indonesia for 2060. So we come now to our question and answer portion. So our colleagues from these countries, as you have heard, have listed different drivers for net zero. Most of you have listed job creation, economic growth, and public health. Alkim also highlighted the impact of the EU carbon tax and the Green Deal for Turkey. I wonder, how do you think we can better and faster achieve what Jack described in his presentation as, better social and political acceptability for net zero? Nhien, can we start with you?
Yeah, I think for Vietnam is not. I think the case quite similar to South Africa, and we also for the political will, the government is to have a committed in Article 26. But we also can see that in the countries we need to, I would say that in the country is not having the same impression as the leader saying, right? So the society, they have to adapt and to really understand what the leader of the country is saying, and they need to have some support from the people as well. So. And of course, investment will come, but it also need to see like how the green finance is come to Vietnam and make the benefit, the real benefits for the people. That means we need to really to localize the production, and also like involve the value chains or supply chains for develop the renewable energy in Vietnam.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Firstly, thank you to my colleagues from all around the world for the insights that you guys have shared tonight. I think from my perspective, it's all around decentralization, localization, and alternative service delivery. And in the end, it's about action. We have lovely plans, we can talk about them forever, but let's get down to business and actually procure what we're talking about and actually start to drive action. I really like the sort of point that was brought up about the Ukrainian war and the challenge that's created around accessing resources into our economies. If we look at localization for perspective, if we can manufacture locally, that solar panel becomes a commodity that can be traded. That inverter becomes a commodity that gets traded, and we no longer look at our basic resources as the commodity that should be traded, but we look at that local beneficiation, that local industrialization to really drive growth and investment within the green economy.
Yeah, thank you, Denise, for the questions. Yeah, when we talk with the Indonesian stakeholder, we always come with this energy trilemma. That's always come out with the discussion. So it's always about affordability, acceptability, everything. It's connected. So in the end, we kind of like they put more emphasis actually on the energy affordability. Why? Because we are a developing nations. We need competitive energy price to let our economy grow. So the government and the national stakeholder put more emphasis on the energy affordability, but to embrace the energy transition to reach net zero, there is of course there is opportunity that we could exploit to kind of like still manage to limit the increase in the energy affordability while also pursuing this more clean technology. Rooftop solar is a clear example. Indonesia is quite abundant, and I couldn't agree more with my colleague Jack on that. And in Indonesia, we also have, because of our oil import, government is now pursuing EV, and now they are also thinking about creating EV industry value chain. And now, to support that, of course, it needs a long-term planning and human resource planning and etc. So opportunity is there, and the key is actually to kind of like connect the economy, the energy, and everything into like one big integrated planning in the long term. So yeah, that's from me.
Well, I agree with Jack. Is political and social acceptability are key. Whatever the model says at the end, this will define the outcome at the end. So the transition should definitely be linked to growth and welfare at the end, so that it can be accepted, it can be implemented. For Turkish example, it clearly has significant benefits actually. As I explained, it's an import-dependent country. So Turkey being a self-sufficient country, relying its own local energy resources will definitely help both to secure energy supply security and also energy affordability as well as this transition will mean concentrating on more technology-focused sectors. Industrial growth and economic growth should come at the end of the day. So these are the opportunities, but of course it's a difficult path. So there are also some serious challenges to be overcome. Financing being maybe one of the most important issues in my opinion. So it will be very important not only for Turkey but for also other countries to develop strategies to allocate, to find financing for the huge investments required for the transition.
All of you mentioned finance, and today is Finance Day here at COP, so we might as well come to that component of accelerating the energy transition. what are your thoughts on the current plans, mechanisms in play in your countries? We know South Africa announced its JETP, its Just Energy Transition Program. We have the Asian Development Bank's energy transition mechanisms, for example, in the G20 chair, Indonesia and Vietnam. Alkim also mentioned the green finance strategy. Maybe you can take this time to elaborate on what your governments are also looking at and how they and the communities, especially those that are most vulnerable to climate impacts, can, faster access these resources. Maybe Jack, would you like to take?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for the question. I guess, President, the Honorable Cyril Ramaphosa was here yesterday to announce South Africa's JETP transaction, as well as our 1.5 trillion rand investment plan to take on the challenges that we've discussed today. And I guess I'd hopefully be allowed to be both positive and negative about those outcomes. Firstly, I think the plan is really revolutionary in thinking through what the opportunities are to really drive impact. But what is disappointing is that that plan has been announced before it went through public consultation, before it's been ratified by being socially and politically acceptable to those that are going to be directly affected. So I think if we look at what is the opportunity to drive impact, we really need to start to see how we take this very exciting, very large investment plan down to actionable items and get that finance onto the ground. When we look at challenges and gaps, we see that a venture capital industry does not exist in South Africa. There's no VC investment. There's very limited early stage investment for project development, project prep. We have almost no finance flowing into adaptation. We did a climate finance mapping for 2020, tracking $64 billion worth of investment on an annual basis. Less than 4% was flowing into adaptation. How do we expect to adapt to what we're already seeing in terms of climate impact if we're not investing in those sectors? So for me, the big thing is now to see how we go from these high-level plans through to real action on the ground and facilitating that finance directly to where it's needed. Thank you.
Deon, would you like to go next?
Yeah, climate finance. Yeah, well, in Indonesia, in the last year, there is a lot of discussion on this similar thing, JETP, and we also have ETM, a lot of initiative actually to support Indonesia to transition, mostly in the power sector. But again, I think it's similar to what my colleague said. The problem is actually, we haven't really solved the problem, even we make this available, this ETM, JETP, everything. Because the transition itself, as I said, in Indonesia, the power sector is the low-hanging fruit. And the key for the transition is actually the renewable development. And we haven't really solved these challenges that kind of like hinders the renewable development so far. So, for example, actually the renewable energy tariff is one of the key block, you could say, for Indonesia renewable energy development. The government has moved forward the new renewable energy tariff regulation, and it has just been published, but it takes 3 years, and it's just one problem. We have to actually prepare a renewable energy project pipeline. We actually have to increase the capacity of our financial institution to kind of like understand this new kind of project, because renewable is still in the early stage of development. So the climate finance is, of course, needed, and at the same time, the government and also the other stakeholders need to really work fast on resolving all of these core problems that is hindering the renewable development. Yeah.
Thank you, Deon. Nhien, would you like to go next?
Yes, I think the case of Vietnam is quite similar to Indonesia, but we have a little bit different. Since from 2015, we already import coal to produce electricity, so it's a little bit challenge for the country to when we look at the ZP, because for the ZPs, and we also have to think how to be just between the people who are in the past was the hero of the country because they was mining the coal and build up and contribute for the economic in the countries, and now they are the kind of like loser because they the sector is not continue develop as usual, so it have to be like for example we propose early retirement for those people, then that means they have a big impact in how to define the jobs for the people who impact or lose job, and how to be continue support for the young people to have to get a new job and also to have the right direction to choose the job, so the new job in the future. So I think that just energy transition is very important for the developing countries, and it depend on the much more or less is for the depend on the decision from the government side, the policy maker. But we also can see that the support from the development partner or the developed country to the developing country is very important, because the technology is always come from the developed countries. So yeah, that's contribution.
Thank you, Nhien. Alkim, can you tell us more about the green finance strategy you mentioned in your presentation?
So yeah, the transition requires or increases the need for investments on the one hand. On the other hand, it also increases the types of the funds and availability of the funds. It's important to access to these funds, especially for developing countries. Turkey did not declare a financing strategy yet, so it should be a part of its overall Net-0 strategy to be declared at the end of the days. But of course, it's important that the government should be the coordinator and the leader to allocate or to just enable the accessibility of these funds for the investments in Turkey. So only for the power sector, for the electricity sector, the required investment amount is around $10 billion per year, and Turkey needs roughly 0.5% of the available international funding, actually. So there are funds available within the green transition, but a clear strategy will be required to reach these funds. So it will be important to have a strategy. It will be important, I think, to have a national taxonomy considering Turkey's own special conditions into consideration, but being compliant with the EU taxonomy as well. So we have a long way to go there, but planning will be key for it.
Thank you, Alkim. Thanks, everyone. We have around 5 minutes for questions from the audience. My colleague Yagna is there with microphone if anyone has any questions. Yes, please.
Yes, hello. You all mentioned phasing out coal. In Vietnam, you said that there would be a need to compensate the coal plant operators. Is that a legal requirement, or could you just tell the coal operators, sorry, it's a climate emergency? And Turkey, since you are a member of the Energy Charter Treaty, do you foresee any claims if you are phasing out coal? And also, is the phase out only for electricity? Because I assume you still need coal for your steel industry. Thank you.
Yeah, Yes, the case of Vietnam, when we talk about phase out coal, then it's more or less about the energy security, because when we reduce electricity from the coal power plant, which is like right now is 42% of the energy mix, power mix in Vietnam, then it's more, the important is its impact to the energy security. Firstly, secondly is when we phase out coal, then we also can see, since Vietnam is the power market in Vietnam is like monopolized by the state-owned enterprise. So that means the SOE plays important role, and they are the one who, supply most of the electricity in the countries. So we phase out coal, that means we reduce the role from the SOE, and that means we could have the government is back up for the state enterprise, right? So it's not legal to not phase out coal, but it's somehow because it impact deeply to the economics of the country. So we need to find a solution to compensate and to balance and do not make a big impact for the people in the countries.
For Turkey, actually, Turkey did not declare any intention to phase out coal. So the intention is most probably, of course, we will see it once the strategies are defined for sure. But the strategies seems to keep the existing coal power plants intact, not to build new ones, but they will stay until the end of their operations. But in that case, of course, reaching net zero will be more challenging and more difficult. It's a difficult subject, and it's an ongoing debate in Turkey, because traditionally, actually, the motto previously, before net zero for Turkey, was renewable and local resources. We should support renewable and local resources, which also includes local lignite. So local coal is an important part of the Turkish energy policy. So now also it's a question mark whether Turkey will declare a coal phase out within a net zero strategy, or if not, what are the plans, or how we're going to reach net zero targets. This is also a question mark. In the short run, yes, first the decarbonization of the power sector is essential, but the use of coal will be stopped in the industry as well in the long run, with electrification, and in the processes where electrification is not possible, other alternatives like green hydrogen will play an important role for the decarbonization.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, it has been a wonderful discussion. Roadmaps looks very good. But again, just have a question around, again, the financing point, that a lot of the interventions which we discussed over here, the solutions, they do need energy transition, does have a lot of costs associated with that. And we have well established that we do need a financing. But again, when it comes to developing countries, again, a major question mark is about the international climate finance flow. I mean, the 100 billion finance which has to flow from, again, developing countries, perhaps all of it is not definitely, as of now, although the major flow is going towards mitigation. But what if that finance flow is not mobilized? Do we have a plan B? What if Paris Agreement reaches the same goal as the same conclusion as the Kyoto Protocol did? What are we going to do that? Because again, a lot of developing countries, what they face, we saw the face of the situation that happened in Pakistan. Again, it's one of the countries which has the least carbon footprint. And it had actually the recent floods and the damage caused by Pakistan, it had an adaptation cost that reached well beyond almost 40 billion. That's almost half the total energy transition cost that is required by 2050. So apart from those strategies, do we have another plan that if that is not mobilized, what are the developing countries going to do? So, yeah, thank you.
Would any of our panelists like to take a first?
Yeah, happy to go from a South African perspective, and I can only speak from a South African perspective, but I think it's really important first step is to understand the public-private partnership that exists in country, to start to understand where public funds are being implemented and where they should be implemented. So looking at perhaps the harder to invest sectors that don't have the financial returns required from the private sector, and then starting to build incentives to push private sector investment into the right sectors. And I think if we start to look innovatively around tax incentives, around mechanisms for driving growth, we can start to really push private sector investment into the right sectors and start to see what can be done with local currency, local investment, while we're trying to negotiate these larger deals. I think we've seen some of the challenges that come with these larger deals. So South Africa from COP26 had this 8.5 billion euro investment declaration, where 97% of that is now in loans that are likely above market rates. So, you know, international finance isn't always going to be the savior that we require. It's how do we implement what we've got? How do we drive local investment, both from the public and the private sector?
Thanks, Jack. Does anyone else? Well, I think that's we also have to wrap up our session anyway. Thank you for your questions, and of course, thank you again for our panel today. I turn it over now to Lidia.
Thank you very much, Denise, for leading this discussion. I would like to thank the panelists and very supportive audience. Thank you for coming here. Thank you for watching us online. And please remember that through our website, you can contact our members, also myself as the Secretariat, and ask us about basically any part of energy transition that you would like to know more of. I think we are the right people because we look on the ambition that is needed, but first of all, how to make this ambition into policies. And this is what we will be working now. This is an implementation COP, and this is exactly how we see our role, from targets to policies, to implementation, to assessment, and to higher ambition, which will clearly be needed, and I'm sure we'll find out about it next year at the global stocktake at COP28, when we will reassess where we are as the world on the road to climate neutrality and 1.5 degrees Celsius. And with that, I would like to leave you with a good thought. We are here. We are ready to help. Please reach out to us. We know what we can do to make this ambition into action. Thank you very much for coming, and I wish you a very good evening here in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27. Thank you.